Should Andy Dalton start the rest of the season for the Carolina Panthers? Let's discuss. Hey folks, if you are tuning into this video, I would appreciate it if you can hit that subscribe button as we continue to grow the channel. And if you're listening on podcast platforms, of course, follow along. Here we are sitting here 4 games into the season in week 5 as I make this video. And there's an open discussion right now around Andy Dalton and Bryce Young. And the question with the Carolina Panthers fan base is, should Andy Dalton play a remainder of the season? And I think when people say that, there's a lot of things that hinge off of this decision to say if he should or if he shouldn't. And starting at the basics, like if the Carolina Panthers continue to lose, I guess in your mind, do you think at that point, if this team is going into the bye or after the bye at 1 or 2 wins, you got the remaining 7 games left on the schedule, do you think it would be beneficial to put Bryce Young out there to get a final evaluation, if you want to call that? For me personally, I don't know yet. I mean, if we're talking scenarios and we're talking about a 1 or 2 win team, I could understand it. I just don't know how this team is going to go back to him. Even in that situation, I think the discrepancies that we have seen between these two, the stats are wild when Andy Dalton plays versus when Bryce Young plays. And I can tell you, backup quarterbacks are supposed to be good in spurts. Like, we know that. They should be able to fill in for a game or 2. They should not be able to walk in to the quarterback room in the number 1 spot and just make your starter look obsolete. And that's what Andy Dalton has done. You go and look at the comparison. Now, we can look at it this year alone. I've talked about this. I mean, you look at the first 2 games of the season, the Panthers were averaging 6.5 points per game. There was no offense at all. And you get down early in some of these games, things like this are going to happen. But the production itself on top of that, 176 yards per game in the first 2 games of the season. Since Andy Dalton took over and scored 1 touchdown. I mean, they struggling for points over here. Since then, Andy Dalton, the team is now putting up 406 yards per game, averaging 30 points. Like, when I talk about this offense has improved, one, we've taken this team that was averaging 6.5 points per game, and now they're averaging a little over 18 on the year, so tripled that number. Last year, the Panthers averaged 13 points per game with Bryce. They're now averaging 30 points per game. And, like, nothing has changed. Like, the skill position players are still there. Heck, even Bryce had Adam Thielen. The run game was there, and people may say, well, we weren't running it as much. I mean, sure, you didn't have success, and or you're trying to get yourself back into some of these games, even though they were really out of reach. But the third down efficiency is another one. When you look at converting 2 first downs within the first 2 weeks of this season, it's a recipe for disaster. And then the 7 touchdowns. The Panthers have scored 7 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. So for me personally, I don't know how sitting out is going to make that big of a difference for Bryce Young. And so for me, maybe if he sits the entire year, you can go into the offseason and camp next year with the reevaluation, or he potentially does get traded. And I think that should still be on the table as discussion. Not saying he should be traded, but I think you've got to keep that in your back pocket as a possibility. I don't think, unless there was just some crazy offer where you had a team that was just as desperate as the Panthers were when we gave up what we gave up to get Bryce Young in the trade with Chicago, maybe you have a situation where someone else is just as desperate, but I don't think they're going to be that desperate to give up whatever it is to get Bryce Young. And really, it'd probably be the Miami Dolphins, at least right now. But you look at this, and so yeah, the first question that I said was, okay, so if we get to the bye week and you're still a 1 or 2 win team, does it make sense for Bryce? Sure. I think for closure, possibly for an audition, but then again, if I'm the Carolina Panthers and I really think that, and sorry, there was a little bug there. If I really think that we are moving on from him or he's not the guy, I don't know that I want to put him back out there the rest of this season. Only because if you are going to trade him away, I don't know that you want to put that back on tape. Like, I want, and I know he's not going to have great tape anyways, but I don't know that I want to, like, remind people. Like, sure, they can go back and watch the games themselves and look at the film and discover it for themselves. But at least in the relevancy of recency bias, I don't want him trotting out there and looking worse than he is. Now, sure, you could probably say, well, what if he does look good? And what if we as the fan base want to feel like, hey, yeah, we know for sure this is not our guy. Okay. Now, we're talking about a losing path, which with the defense depleted and lots of injuries there, but with some guys slowly working their way back. Ian Thomas, know he's offense, tight end, helping the run game. With Dane Jackson coming back, hopefully DJ Wonnum coming back soon, help out at edge. Marquise Haynes was just signed. Maybe they can balance out, right? Maybe they can pull off a few wins. And if they do pull off wins, and I mean, I'm saying if they get 4 wins before the bye, and they're still in the playoff hunt. Now, this is all theoretical, but if they could, they're 4-6. I think Andy Dalton is still going to be your quarterback. If they're 5-5 or above 500, there's no doubt. But I think 4-6 is the threshold. If they are 3-7 going into the bye, I think you could make a strong case that even in that situation, probably going to look at Bryce Young. And I don't know, because even when I say that, if Dave Canales has made up his mind that no matter what, Andy Dalton's going to be the future of this team. And some people will say, how can Andy Dalton's like 36.9, what is that, 9 months, 36, 9 months, turning 37 pretty soon. So, yeah, he is an older quarterback, but still got a few years. I mean, you look at Joe Flacco, people kind of wrote him off. He's still bouncing around doing his thing. I know Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Famer, so that's kind of a different situation. But you look at the active leaders in passing yards. Now I was actually a little bit surprised by this. One, Aaron Rodgers is your leader with 59,000. Matthew Stafford, 57,000. Flacco, 44,000. Russell Wilson, 43. Kirk Cousins, 40. Derek Carr, 39. And then Andy Dalton with 39 as well. You have Ryan Tannehill right there is technically active, and then Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, and Patrick Mahomes. That rounds out your top 11. And it's a bunch of guys under there. But I think it just, for me, when I look at the state of like, oh yeah, maybe Andy is the future, I don't think he would get paid like some of these other quarterbacks. We saw the Geno Smith situation. He was kind of that middle tier. I think Andy Dalton would be in kind of the middle tier. I don't think he's going to be a market setter, 50, 60, 70 million. But I do think whatever happens here, I think he's proven he can be an NFL starting quarterback. And it may not be here next year, but I think he could probably go somewhere and get probably a 2-year contract. Maybe it's back here in Carolina. It's weird that this whole time the Panthers invested so heavily in trying to get their quarterback and spending resources, and then they signed a guy, a backup quarterback from New Orleans, comes over and he's been sitting here. We saw his shine against Seattle last year, and then in the 2 games this year, what he has done for this team. So if you ride this out, Bryce Young still here, Panthers trying to make a decision on Andy Dalton, I think it makes sense. Like, there's a lot of people speculating, like, should he be here next year? And why would you take an older quarterback over what you have? And I'm like, just look at the production on the field. I know at some point it's going to drop off. And I know I I don't look at it as a Band-Aid. I look at it as an opportunity for this team to go out and build the roster for the next quarterback. Andy Dalton, with what we have, has shown he can lead the team. He can score some points. And if you bring back Deontay Johnson, Chuba Hubbard, guys like that, continue to strengthen around him, really what we're going to focus on is the defensive side of the ball, because the next quarterback that comes here, and I'll say this, and I've said it a few times, the Panthers should not draft a quarterback this year, like coming up in 2025. I don't care where they finish, if they're first overall in the draft board, if they're second, top 5, top 10, they need to draft guys on the defensive side of the ball and build through there. Look at the weaknesses with the pass rush. And I know this is a conversation around Andy Dalton starting, but I also think you got to have the full perspective of where this team is. And so Andy, to me, is not a Band-Aid. I think he's maybe you call it a bridge. And it's funny, we've had bridge quarterbacks here: Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker. You look at the guys that were here, and I think what we're seeing, and this is just not here, but throwing these rookie quarterbacks out there, it's just not the same. College system, different from, and I know the NFL offense is moving more towards the college style, but at the same time, it's just different. And it's nowhere near what it is in college, where college, they're in shotgun like 90% of the time. So you got to adapt to that. But thinking about the market itself and Bryce Young, Andy Dalton, who's going to be here, looking ahead to free agency. And this is another discussion because it's like, who's going to be available? Well, sure enough, look at that. Sam Darnold. I don't think the Panthers could test the waters of bringing him back here, and I don't know that he would want to. I mean, he'd be a free agent. If things go as planned, he's likely the guy there in Minnesota, and then you have J.J. McCarthy as the backup, similar to Bryce, but, a little different because he was hurt. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock, Jarrett Stedman, Andy Dalton, Justin Fields. So Justin Fields, like, out of this bunch, and I'm not saying he's like the choice that I would have, but he's probably the youngest quarterback with most upside outside of a Zach Wilson and or a Trey Lance that we really haven't seen. Do you, as Dave Canales, look at this and say, well, I could probably do something with that? I don't know. There's always a possibility. Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston, he's another one. He's only 30. He'll be 31. Maybe if you're with, and I'm not saying the Panthers should do this, but if you're into the veteran quarterbacks. So I think if Andy Dalton does leave, I would look for a veteran to be brought in to compete alongside Bryce Young. In my mind, no matter what happens, there's going to be a quarterback battle next year. Unless Andy Dalton's back. And maybe even then there is a quarterback battle just to see if Bryce Young has shown us anything. If Bryce Young is here next year on the team, I have a very good feeling that we will see him in the preseason. He, no doubt, you look at all the reps that Plummer got, Bryce Young needed every single one of those. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he is here and we are still in this development phase that you have him on the team running in the preseason. So state of the team. In my mind, I do think Andy Dalton should start the rest of the season, honestly, no matter what. And I think it shows because Bryce Young is so shattered and shot right now. And I know he's upbeat on the sideline, but as a quarterback starting in the NFL, he doesn't have it right now. And I go and think about him coming back out. To want to tell me maybe you are moving on from Andy Dalton. I don't know. You also have the situation too, potentially if we are out of the playoff hunt, but maybe it comes after the bye. Maybe we're in the mix up until week 14, 15. Then you could put him out there for 3 or 4 games, maybe, to get a final look as well. I think that in my mind seems the most realistic. I think For fans that think that Bryce Young's just going to come back after the bye, I believe the way this thing's going to play out is the Panthers are going to run with Andy Dalton, of course, and knock on wood, he doesn't get hurt. Run with him until they are eliminated from the playoffs, assuming they don't make it, which hopefully they do. Shock some people. But once they get to that point, if it happens where they're not in contention, maybe that's where we see Bryce as one final letdown. And maybe that is his final audition to be traded and to move on from there. The only other thing I'll say is quarterback-wise for next year, you do have Geno Smith, which I know he's under contract. But if for some reason didn't want to stay there in Seattle, got 1 year left on the deal, maybe he gets shipped off down here as a potential trade. I don't think that's really going to happen, but sets the bar, man. It also just like looking at the quarterback market shows, man, it's tough to find one that hits and that sticks. But hey, anyways, folks, I'd love to know if you think that Andy Dalton should start the rest of this season. Let us know in the comments, and or if you're listening on the podcast platform, hey, reach out to there as well. Also, folks, if you ever have a question for the show, one, you can always drop a comment on YouTube, but the YouTube comments are kind of crazy now. Not crazy comments, but me keeping up with all that stuff, the quickest way, if you want to send an email to the show with a question, mailbag, whatever it is, Gmail right now, we're not super official with anything. It's just the number 2 growls, number 1 roar. So 2 growls, 1 roar at gmail.com. You can send them all over. Of course, you can always ask me on whatever. I'm really on X. I'm also on other platforms. But if you want to really get in touch with me, you can there. Even if you're not following me, you can send me a message. I'll see it so I can respond. That's the easiest way. But anyways, I appreciate y'all tuning into this show. And as always, keep pounding, and y'all have a good one.